Coming up in this episode of In Clear Focus,
consumers are busy living the best lives they can, and they don't really have much bandwidth to think about brands in abstract terms. So our jobs as marketers are to make those brands relevant and desirable. So when they are open to buying, our brands more readily come to mind.
You're listening to In Clear Focus, fresh perspectives on marketing and advertising, produced weekly by Big Eye, a strategy-led, full-service creative agency growing brands for clients globally. Hello, I'm your host, Adrian Tennant, Chief Strategy Officer. Thank you for joining us. Building strong, effective brands requires a systematic approach grounded in consumer understanding and organizational awareness. As marketers face volatile market conditions, changing media environments, and organizational pressures focused on short-term results, the need for practical frameworks to guide brand development has never been greater. Our guest today is an accomplished marketer and brand strategist, as well as the author of this month's Big Eye Book Club selection, Effective Brand Building: Unlocking Growth with Strategy, Insights and Measurement. Andrew Geoghegan has held senior roles at businesses including Diageo, PepsiCo and William Grant & Sons, where he's Chief Marketing Officer. Andrew has worked on brands such as Guinness, Johnnie Walker and Tropicana. His paper on creating a culture of effectiveness at Diageo won Gold, Best New Learning and Best Use of Data from the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising in 2020. Andrew has been a regular columnist for Marketing Week since 2018, being recognised as one of the top 100 marketers in 2022 and 2023. To discuss some of the key ideas in his book, Effective Brand Building, I'm delighted that Andrew is joining us today from London, England. Andrew, welcome to In Clear Focus.
Thanks, Adrian. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, first, I'd like to congratulate you on the publication of Effective Brand Building, which I believe is your first book. So what motivated you to write it?
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. I wrote it because I wanted it primarily to be useful to the audience. So it won't have escaped your listeners' attention that it's a bit of a bear garden out there right now. The last 5 years have been probably the most volatile and uncertain that any of us remember. And honestly, it's only going to continue that way. And this coincides with a time when investment in marketing skills has been very low, and many organizations simply don't understand the role of marketing. Marketers, pretty resilient, resourceful people, and I really wanted to help them and recognize that also we're in a time of real change in terms of consolidation on the tech platforms and, how you reach and interact with consumers. And I guess one of the point is, in all of this, I just don't like the tone I hear on platforms such as LinkedIn directed towards marketing folk. And it's generally quite critical. We hear a lot, often from certain consultants who have got very clear views on how to grow brands and are quite critical of marketing. And then everyone piles on, and you see these examples. If you think about the last year, the marketing examples that come most readily to mind are things like Jaguar and the Apple iPad example. And it's unfortunate, isn't it? Because everybody's putting their energy and effort into things, and it's really hard to get great work through an organization. And here we are with people who are highly critical and everybody piling in. So the gap I saw in the market was for a book written by a practitioner. So someone who's actually done the job from the inside, who could share perspectives from different people, just to be helpful and to empower those people who are really doing the best they can in quite challenging circumstances. So that was my motivation.
Well, in the book, you emphasize that understanding consumer behavior is fundamental. Can you share some key insights about how consumers make purchasing decisions?
Yeah, it's a really important part of the book because, again, when you're at the coalface, you often get so into execution that you really lose a little bit of sight of what you're trying to achieve. So at a macro level, I always want to understand who people are, the lives they want to live, how culture affects that, societal expectations, economics, politics. At the moment, the ever-changing world that we're in, literally on a day-to-day basis, and how that can constrain or enable people. And these things influence behavior, but can feel intangible. And then at a lower level, I want to understand people's relationship to a category, how it fits into that bigger picture emotionally as well as on a practical level, how it meets their needs on different occasions, how it solves the problems that they have. And then I think about the role of a brand grounded in a product or service and how that can be relevant to them. And then probably the lowest level of detail, and this is when it all becomes really important, is that moment of choice. So when you're in a buying situation, you're in the market for something, what are the simple triggers? Being available, being visible, having the right offer and the price. How can I ensure that someone buys my brand versus the competition? So I think really understanding consumer behavior holistically is an important key to winning in that moment of choice. And in businesses typically focused on the trade, that often gets forgotten and left behind.
How has this understanding of consumer behavior evolved with recent developments in behavioral economics?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the impact of behavioral economics in the last kind of 15 years has been phenomenal, and it's helped us all enormously. It's really helped make clear the connection between consumer attitude and behavior, and how, to quote Dan Ariely, how predictively irrational all of that is, because we've become really clear about the biases that shape the choices that we make. So examples of that would be social proof, how somebody wants to be seen by others impacts a choice that otherwise would be very rational about the pricing or the functional delivery of something. And so as marketers, we're really able to lean in and understand that much more than ever before. I think the other thing in behavioral economics that has been really fundamental in shifting how we think is that of system one and system two thinking. So that's the Daniel Kahneman work from Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. So most decisions are made on autopilot. I always think it's a bit like when you're driving from somewhere and you arrive and you go, how did I get here? It's because we make most of our decisions subconsciously. And yet, when we first interact with a category, we do have to use our system two brain. If you're buying a car for the first time, what are the dimensions that are important to you? Is it whether it's electric or whether it's petrol or gas powered, the kind of level of spec, the distances you want to travel, the number of people that are going to be in it? You have to do a lot of work based on your budget to find out the choice you want to make. But once you've entered a category and you've maybe made a choice once or twice, it starts to become automatic. And even for expensive purchases, we make them on autopilot. So I think that's been one of the most fascinating changes in how we view consumers and their behavior. For brands, it's really enabled us to elevate up to thinking about emotional needs and really doing work that connects at a deep level, and also recognizing the importance of being disruptive. So cutting through, because people are not paying attention. They're going about living their lives quite happily. And so I think that's been really helpful to marketing folk.
Well, a heading in your book that stood out to me was consumers don't care about your brand. So, Andrew, could you explain why consumers don't care?
I mean, it's deliberately a little bit provocative, because I'm sure we can all think about brands that we do love and do care about and are prepared to invest time in seeing what they're doing, finding out if they've got new products and things like that. But in general, consumers are busy living the best lives they can, and they don't really have much bandwidth to think about brands in abstract terms. So their lives are pretty much full. And our jobs as marketers are to make those brands relevant and desirable. So when they are open to buying, our brands more readily come to mind. And that's not to say that people don't desire brands and defer buying them sometimes, and particularly in the luxury area. But this is really in stark contrast to what it's like when you work on a brand. When you work on a brand, it looms large in your life every day. It's in every conversation, and it's in every email you send, and it's in every PowerPoint. And you can really overestimate its importance to other people. So realizing and being clear that consumers don't care about your brand, I think is really powerful in pushing you to work harder, to use more imagination, to help your brand stand out and be more desirable.
I know that you believe to succeed, marketers must first understand their organization's culture and structure. Why is organizational awareness so critical to brand building?
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic. I devote quite a bit of time in the book. There's an entire chapter and it's a recurring theme. I think it's because marketers often spend time thinking about their consumer and customer, and they forget how critical understanding the organization and its biases are. And unlike many other functions in an organization like finance, supply, sales, marketing's not so well defined. And so the role it can play, depending on the industry and the organization, can be highly variable. So it's really important, if you want to drive effective brand growth, to be really clear on the role that marketing plays in the organization and how other people see it. And it goes a little bit beyond that. I provoke people to think and understand what the business strategy is. So, what its vision for the long term is and how it's going to grow, the choices it's made, how the business is structured, how it works, what the core processes are, how people are rewarded, and how that shapes their behavior and the choices that they make, the type of talent and capability that you've got, and also what the culture of the organization is. And if you think about culture as a wrapper around all of those things, it's what the business says about itself, what's implicit in how things work, the kind of stories it tells. And if you can understand those things, ultimately, I guess it's a bit like thinking about the organization as a consumer. It's turning your marketing skills onto that. You're much more powerful in understanding its needs and also how to motivate it and get it behind the kind of brand building that will drive growth. And the reality is brand building takes time. So, we started this conversation talking about how volatile the external environment was. The reality is, to do this well, the brand building cycle is 2 to 3 years. So you've got to get an organization aligned behind some clear choices and to really have the courage and confidence to stick with them over time, whilst being prepared to adapt as you get new information and things change. And that can be extremely difficult to achieve when there's so much pressure on delivering in the short term. So I really think that diagnosis and being clear on that is important. If you don't have that, you can't really pass go in terms of achieving sustainable, scalable growth on brands for the long term.
Interesting point. In the second part of your book, you focus on creating an effective brand strategy. Andrew, could you walk us through your approach to conducting a 6 C's audit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you read the book, you'll see I'm kind of agnostic on tools. I think the point is pick the one that works for you and stick with it. There are alternative ways of doing. There's Porter's 5 Forces is another example. But for me, this is a really simple, memorable framework. 6 C's are context, category, competition, consumer, customer, and commercial. And they are the things that help you understand the forces shaping your brand fundamentally. So, as I said, it's not the only way to structure it, but it's really simple and it will capture the imagination of your team. And it enables you to take a step back and really think about what's going on against each of these things using data. The best data you've got doesn't need to be perfect. And once you've got those perspectives and you've formed a picture of the top 2 to 3 things that's happening in each of those, you can really synthesize that further and really get to the heart of what the biggest opportunities and challenges your brand needs to overcome in order to access growth, in order to grow penetration. So it's really just a thinking framework that helps you apply your data, judgment, and get your team aligned behind the most important things to spend your time and effort on.
Excellent. Well, as strategists, we love a good framework.
We do.
Well, Andrew, in your book, you also discuss the different stages of brand development. Can you give us an overview of the key differences between brands in the seeding, scaling, and maturing phases?
Yeah, of course. As you say, I reference this in the book. I define them and I use them at various points because the kind of activities that you need to do really do differ. And, even if you're managing a global brand, I think I use Magnum, the ice cream brand, as an example in the book. You might be at a mature phase in the UK, but you could be seeding in a market like China. So seeding really is the start point when you're really establishing the brand in some distribution and you're establishing what it is about it that makes it remarkable. Scaling tends to be the phase where you're really building distribution. So you're making the brand much more available, and you're also leveraging that thing that makes it remarkable to a broader audience. The third phase, maturing, is typically when you've maxed out most of the available distribution, and your growth really needs to come at that point by increasing the buying rate or the rate of sale, which is about increasing penetration. And, if you think about those three phases, in the first phase, your marketing budgets are likely to be quite small, and therefore being really focused on, maybe just one channel with a key message is really important. And it's likely that you'll be doing that often on a more one-to-one basis. So, some brands will seed in high-end restaurants or in using farmers markets or really niche channels, actually. In the second phase, you might be using one or two channels and you might have a secondary message. You're probably focused on driving advocacy as well, on getting people to spread the word of your brand, because it will still feel at that stage as if it's something that's been discovered. Maturity is, of course, around being mass market. Arguably, by the way, there's a fourth phase, which is decline. So when you're in that maturing phase, you absolutely need to keep the brand fresh. But that's the phase where you're likely to have access to the largest budgets and be able to do the most impactful work. But it's really important to know those things. If you're in that seeding phase, there's absolutely no point spending your time developing a big advertising campaign. You're not going to have the money and be able to leverage it. Whereas, if you're in the final stage, if you're in maturity, the likelihood is you've probably got the money to invest behind 2 or 3 big growth drivers at scale. So it has big implications, I think, for how you approach growing a brand. And as I said, even the same brand in different markets might need to be treated differently.
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back after this message. Each month, in partnership with our friends at Geoghegan Page, the Big Eye Book Club features books by industry experts and thought leaders. Our featured book for March is Effective Brand Building: Unlock Growth with Strategy, Insights and Measurement by Andrew Geoghegan. This comprehensive guide gives marketers practical wisdom for creating brand-building strategies that deliver short and long-term business growth. The book includes real-world examples from leading brands including McDonald's, Apple and Unilever to illustrate how asking the right questions creates the optimal conditions for effective brand building. As an In-Clear Focus listener, you can save 25% on a print or electronic version of this month's featured book when you order directly from the publisher at geogheganpage.com. Just enter the exclusive promo code BIGEYE25 at checkout. This code is valid for all Geoghegan Page titles, including pre-orders. Shipping is always complimentary for customers in the US and UK when you order directly from Geoghegan Page. So to start unlocking reliable long-term brand growth, order your copy of Effective Brand Building today at geogheganpage.com. Welcome back. I'm talking with Andrew Geoghegan, the author of this month's Big Eye Book Club selection, Effective Brand Building. Well, Andrew, the final section of your book focuses on measurement. Why do you think many organizations struggle with effective measurement?
Yeah, this is a big topic in the book. It runs throughout, but actually I address it very explicitly at the back end. So what it isn't is if you like, a technical manual of measurement and how to do it. It's much more about thinking about the culture and the challenges that we face. Because fundamentally, we are all drinking from a fire hydrant of data. There is so much of it. It is overwhelming, I think, for most marketing people. It's not only that, but data is used by many of the platforms as a sales tool. So actually, data is high pressure for marketing folk. There's always a platform who's using it to inspire you to spend more of your marketing dollars on it. So it's very easy for people to get lost. So my advice really is to take the time to really step back, be clear on your consumer, get clear on the most fertile opportunities for growth, have activities and plans that are aligned to those. So you're making really clear, polarized choices. And once you do that, you can understand what the KPIs are, the things that you absolutely must measure. And you can be really bold then in deciding not to measure absolutely everything. When you're clear on the KPIs, you can choose the data that really aligns to those and the frequency with which you'll buy it and use it and audiences internally. And then the other thing I really advise people to do is to map those audiences and their information needs. The most senior people actually probably need the least amount of data. And it's probably the most powerful data around kind of performance and future potential. And then people who are involved in the more operational aspects of brand building will actually need quite a lot of data around, particularly media performance in specific channels. But again, you've got to curate that in a way that is aligned to what each of your individual pieces of marketing is designed to do and ultimately ladder up to it in performance terms. So my advice is really to take ownership of developing a measurement system, be clear on KPIs based on the strategic choices that you've made, and have the courage to take back ownership and not look at everything. And then there's something around curiosity and learning. So data is about enabling us to test hypotheses, to learn, to try new things. So it's never very black and white. Often people see it as a definite answer to something. But if you approach it with a different mindset, you can focus data on making different future decisions, as opposed to what often happens which is just a lot of effort to make sense of the past, and therefore not a lot of action coming from that. And the brands which are best at driving effective growth, I think, really get on top of data. They really take ownership of it. And they don't let data rule them. They're really clear on it and really tight.
As regular listeners know, we love case studies on In Clear Focus. So Andrew, could you share a case study or example that illustrates the principles of effective brand building in action?
Yes. In the book, I've got a lot of case studies. I reference IPA case studies a lot. The IPA is the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising. They're awards that happen every 2 years, I think, are the highest standard in the world because they require real proof. So it's not just good storytelling, it's real data and proof. There's nowhere to hide. And they are incredible case studies. So I was very fortunate that the IPA gave me access to a lot of their winning papers. And in the book, you'll find reference to brands like Audi, Guinness, McDonald's, Tesco. And actually, the McDonald's one is one I always come back to because it's a case study over a long period of time that really exemplifies some of the great behaviors of effective brand building. It's a UK case study. They arrived in the UK in, I think it's 1974, and basically had a phenomenal growth for 30 years based on increasing distribution, increasing the number of sites they had in their retail estate. But I think the same was true in the US, that they hit a number of quite significant crises. So there was the whole health and well-being thing. We remember Super Size Me. There was a big legal case that they had to fight. There was a real shift in the availability of alternative casual dining chains. So, people were able to choose different things. There was the arrival of coffee culture. So, different spaces for people to interact on different occasions. And then COVID in 2020, when in effect, their entire estate of restaurants closed for a period of, depending on where you were, up to 2 years of disruption. And what's remarkable about McDonald's is, of course, they had used their consumer experience to work out how to address these things. So they changed their menu offering, they changed their retail environment. But I think the thing that's most powerful is how they've used marketing consistently over that period. And their positioning in most markets, the UK included, is to really establish themselves as a slice of local life. Health and wellbeing is a good example. You might think that they would invest time in talking about nutritionals, but no, they spent their time reminding UK consumers why they loved to come to McDonald's and showed people who looked like us, young and old, families with kids. And they just reminded us of that powerful place that they play rather than trying to persuade us that a burger was as good as a salad. I think they knew that was an argument they were never going to win. And yeah, it can be a fun experience, which, as part of a healthy lifestyle is probably not the worst thing. unless, of course, like Mug and Spurlock, you're living off it. So I think their marketing is remarkable in how they've used that platform to solve problems and really understood what their consumer's looking for. The coffee example, they know that their consumer wants value. So they didn't talk about the beans. They talked about the environment and the great coffee that they served. They're very smart. I think we underestimate a brand like that quite a lot. And they've got the rigor. They can demonstrate the results of these things. So clear focus choices, great consumer insight, lined up against the biggest issues that they faced, and consistent over time, but fresh in how it deals with the various challenges they've faced. I think is a lovely case study.
Also very distinctive brand assets in use there.
Very distinctive brand assets. Yeah, I mean, that must be one of the most, if not the most recognizable logo in the whole world. And they use it so powerfully to signal wherever they are in the world.
Andrew, given the pressure on marketers to deliver short-term results, how can they balance building long-term brand equity with driving immediate sales?
It's another great question. I always think the long-term starts tomorrow, because actually to gain credibility and to be able to get that balance right between long and short, you have to be a good street fighter as well as someone focused on the long term. So you simply can't ignore all of the close-in things that you need to do to ensure that your brand is going to win in the marketplace. Having the right proposition, the right price point, the right distribution, the right visibility. These things are as true, by the way, for service offerings as they are for products. And really understanding in the short term what's going on and making some really, considered choices. If as a marketer you can take hold of that performance, it gives you license to then start to ramp up investment and make bigger, bolder choices. I think I mentioned earlier that the cycle's really 2 to 3 years. Unless it's a startup. No one is starting from a blank piece of paper. You're always in flow at some stage. So to have permission to do long term and to balance that, you must focus on the short and medium term first.
In the book, you discuss media consolidation and the challenges of the changing media environment. Andrew, how should brand managers think about effective media connections in today's landscape?
This is very much a watching brief. So I think the last 15, 20 years have been fascinating. We went from brands based on big TV campaigns into the era that was referred to as digital social media. And people are still talking about that when, in fact, everything is digital, even TV. And the advertising that's served up on TV is, also highly selective. It's not mass anymore. It hasn't been for some time. But really what I think a lot of people have missed is just how consolidated media has become. If you look at the top 10 channels by advertising revenue across the world, I mean, it's remarkable. It's Meta, it's Microsoft, it's TikTok, it's Tencent, it's Amazon. It's insane, actually. And each of these platforms works in an entirely different way and doesn't really allow you to see what's going on in the consumer journey across. So the share of media that you used to spend with a traditional media agency has really fallen off a cliff. And I think this is, I said it's a working brief. I think a lot of brands are recognizing that they need to take in-house much more control of the consumer journey and connection and really understand the key touch points. The moments when consumers are appraising and thinking about and learning, the moment on the path to purchase and the purchase itself. So I think that's really important. And we also have to be really aware that particularly the rise of retail media, which in old money, we used to talk about proximity media, putting media up in and around stores and bars and in areas where people were thinking. These are increasingly not really media points, but they are the price of being on those platforms. So if you're not careful as a brand, your money ends up being spent on what you think is generating leads, generating awareness, but actually it's just money that ensures that when a consumer searches on a certain retail platform that you're even on the list. So it's a really challenging time that we're in. And the balance of power has very much shifted to some of those big international tech companies. And this for me is a real one that we need to continue to learn and experiment with.
Thinking about the customer journey, are there particular tips you might have for how people should approach that in this more digital environment?
Yeah, like many things, it hasn't changed that much. And, if you think about the last decade, we've had the rise of social media, or last 20 years, rise of social media. Then there's the metaverse, which never really became anything. We've got AI, which is clearly making big changes at the moment of how we interact with each other and how we interact with these platforms. So there are two things here. One is be really clear on how your consumer behavior is changing, how they're interacting with each other, how they're thinking about learning about the product and service choices they're going to make, and how they're using different types of digital resources to inform themselves and make decisions. But then in the same breath, take that step back and recognize that it may become a bit more of a squiggly line, but the funnel is still pretty much intact. So, people enter or get to a point where they're interested in a category. So I mentioned cars earlier. You possibly get to a stage in life where you look at buying your first car. Based on your economics, you work out what that looks like and do more research. The research used to be in showrooms. Now it's online on YouTube and looking at videos and all of those things. And then you buy. And actually now you probably go in and test drive, but you probably buy it and spec it online because, cars are made just in time rather than how they used to be made, which was they made a load of them and had them in giant car parks, and they would work out what was available for you to buy and ship. So the fundamentals haven't changed, but how consumers address the needs on that path to purchase and the resources that they've got access to, what has credibility to them and what's relevant has changed. And so it's really important, whatever industry you're in, be it a cruise liner industry or hotels or drinks or whatever, it's really important that you understand what those critical points are, but importantly, how information and source credibility has changed based on our evolving digital landscape.
Perfect. What's the one thing you'd like readers to take away from your book?
Great question. I would like readers to take away that, they've got this, that they are resourceful, resilient. They've got the ability to drive growth from their brands. Fundamentally, it's not that impossible. If you set your mind to it, if you ensure you understand the organization and that you have a handful of repeatable processes, that you build the capability of your teams in service of the kind of work that you need to do, that you have access to and can unlock creativity, and you've got good measurement, then actually everything is possible, even in the world that we're in today. So the book is very much written to be helpful, useful, and encourage. And, I think of it as something you might have in your kit bag to pull out at times when you're going, how do I think about this? And so it would be very much to reinforce to people that they can do this.
Excellent. Well, I will say my copy is already well thumbed, so I think you're onto something there.
Thanks, Adrian.
Andrew, if listeners would like to learn more about your book, Effective Brand Building, or follow your thought leadership, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, they can find it at all good booksellers online and in real life. So Geoghegan page, where there is a discount code, Adrian, that you can share, as well as Amazon and other places. So it's there in all good booksellers. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always really interested in hearing what people's reactions are to the book. So, please connect with me and drop me a line. I hope you find the book useful. I certainly would love to hear any feedback that people have on it.
And just a reminder, as Andrew mentioned, that as an In Clear Focus listener, you can save 25% on effective brand building when you order directly from the publisher at geogheganpage.com using our exclusive promo code BIGEYE25 at checkout. Andrew, thank you very much for being our guest this week on In Clear Focus.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks again to my guest this week, Andrew Geoghegan, the author of this month's featured book, Effective Brand Building, Unlocking Growth with Strategy, Insights and Measurement. As always, you'll find a complete transcript of our conversation with timestamps and links to the resources we discussed on the In Clear Focus page at bigeyeagency.com. Just select Insights from the menu. Thank you for listening to In Clear Focus, produced by Big Eye. I've been your host, Adrian Tennant. Until next week, goodbye.